Hey everyone, welcome to a new semester. We are going to get started on a lot of new content, so this is the review from the end of the semester and what we did the week before midterms as well. So week 16 review, we're going to go over the legislative branch because we are now done with that. We are going to be moving on to the two other branches of government, the executive and judicial, so this is going to be our last review of that. And we are going to do a quick review over immigration because you guys got to watch that 30 Days episode. So starting off, the legislative branch. If you remember, it gets its power from Article 1 of the Constitution. And the legislative branch is there to create, make, or change laws. You learned the process of a bill becoming a law, so that's one of their big powers. Another one they can do is they can declare war, and they also have the power to control the impeachment trials, and there's been a bunch of that in the news. President Trump has just been impeached for the second time in the House of Representatives, so he is the first president to ever be impeached twice. So if you remember back to all that we learned about that, it is very relevant in our society today. So then just a quick review of the House versus Senate. Like I said, there's been so much about them in the news. And so you were probably thinking, man, like I didn't realize I was going to apply this stuff so much to what I'm hearing about. But that's the beauty of government class. So the House is consisted of 435 members. Remember, representation is based off of state population. So that's how, however many people live in the state, the more representatives you get. These people serve for 2 years. Another big thing the House does is they initiate impeachment proceedings, like I said. So they're the ones that decide whether or not they're going to impeach you. So this basically means that they say you're impeached. That means you're going to go to trial for whatever offense you had or created. So being impeached doesn't necessarily mean that person did it. It just means that they are now going to be held trial. And that trial will happen in the Senate. And then remember, the House is led by the Speaker of the House. And then in the Senate, they have 100 members, so that is 2 from each state. It's equal representation for each state. And they serve for 6 years. And they try the impeached officials. So like I said, after they are impeached in the House, it moves to the Senate, and that's where the trial actually happens. And they hear the evidence, and they vote on whether or not to remove that person from office. So that will be coming up in the future. We'll see more of that. The vice president is the president of the Senate, but that is more of a ceremonial role. The only thing they can do is cast a tie vote. They don't get to vote unless it's a tie, and they don't get to speak on the floor or anything like that. The majority leader is actually the most powerful person in the Senate, and the majority leader in the Senate is about to change due to the Democratic Party having more people in the Senate. It's actually at 50-50 right now, but since Kamala Harris will be the president of the Senate as the VP, she's a part of the Democratic Party, so she'll cast the tie vote on who's going to be the majority leader, so it will go to the Democrats. And then checks and balances. So this is the system set in place to make sure that no branch of government becomes too powerful. So some of the checks that the legislative branch gets to use is they get to approve or reject presidential appointments. So those are appointments to the cabinet and federal judges. And so the president gets to appoint them, but the president's got to get the okay from the legislative branch in order for those to become official. They also get to approve or reject treaties. They can override vetoes with a 2/3 vote, and they can impeach the president and federal judges. And then we looked at, lastly, with the legislative branch, how a bill becomes a law. So, just a real quick speed through. I'm sure you guys have heard enough about this. I did a review video on it. You guys got to watch a bunch of fun videos, but just in case, remember, a bill is drafted by either a representative in the House of Representatives or a senator in the Senate. And then whichever one, it is drafted by, that's the side of Congress that it starts in. So it is then introduced to the floor in either the House or the Senate, and then it is assigned to committee. The committee will then create a bunch of markups on the bill. It'll add things called amendments, make some changes, try and make everyone happy, so people vote yes on it. And then it moves back to the whole chamber. The whole chamber can vote on it. If they vote yes, it gets to move to the opposite side. So if it starts in the House, it then moves to the Senate. If it started in the Senate, it moves to the House. The whole process is repeated again. And then let's say it gets passed in both the House and the Senate and moves to the President for approval. If the President says yes, the bill becomes a law. Remember, if the President says no, that's what's called a veto. Congress can override a veto with a 2/3 vote. So that's one of the checks and balances. It's got two. So you get to kind of see how it plays in here. So it was just a real quick final overview of the legislative branch so we can move on to the next two branches of government. So the other thing you looked at was immigration. So the U.S. immigration law, currently it's called Immigration and Nationality Act. Please excuse my typo on there. I put two I's. It's called the INA. So this sets a law on how many visas are permitted each year. And a caveat to this is it can not, like, there's a per country ceiling. So this means that a bunch of immigrants cannot come from the same country. It cannot exceed 7% of the total immigration from one country a year. So that means that there is a limit on how many people can come from each country. And if we hit that limit, that's the end. No more people from that country can obtain a visa. And a visa is the authorization for a foreign person to enter here, remain here, and leave the country. They can travel back home, they can come back, that sort of thing. But this does not mean they are a citizen. Visas are just saying that you can live here, work here temporarily. So I feel like that's where a lot of people got confused in their writing of their opinion paragraphs, is they said either an immigrant needs to be here legally and be a citizen, or they shouldn't be able to be here. Well, that's not actually true, because people with visas aren't citizens, but they are still here legally. They're still very much allowed to be here. So that's just one thing that I really wanted to make sure I pointed out. Not everybody that is here that is not a citizen is not here illegally. They could be a non-citizen and still be able to live here. Some types of visas are visitor visas, temporary work visas, student visas, spousal visas. So for instance, like, students will come abroad a lot of times and they'll need a 4-year visa to live here. That doesn't mean they're a citizen, but it doesn't mean they're here illegally either. It means that they've been permitted to live here and go to university here, and then they'll just return home afterwards. And then let's look at the different types of immigration. So I wanted to cover this term. It's called lawful permanent residents, LPRs. These are non-citizens who are allowed to be in the United States. And they have to be here 3 to 5 years to become U.S. citizens before they can apply to become U.S. citizens. And a lawful permanent resident is when they possess a green card. I'm sure many people have heard about green cards, but that's what that means. It means you possess the identification needed to be a lawful permanent resident. That does not mean they are citizens, though. Different types of immigration include family-based immigration. So this allows certain family members of citizens and LPRs to come to the United States. For instance, spouses, children under the age of 18. If a person is 18 and they're an immigrant here because they were born here, but their parents weren't born here, when they turn, I think it's 21, they can bring their parents here, things like that. The other type of immigration is employment-based immigration. And so this allows employers to hire outside of the United States for a temporary amount of time. However, it's important to remember that there's limitations on the amount of visas that we can give out to people as well. They set a number. So for instance, there's only 40,000 visas available for skilled workers right now. So if we've given out all of our visas and you're trying to come over for some sort of employment, and the category that you fit in, if all the visas are giving out, then you will not be granted one. I mean, it's just kind of to determine to make sure that people are coming over in certain categories. There's different types of employment that people can be seeking here, so those would be different types of visas. And then there's also refugee and asylees. So refugees are allowed to enter the United States based on the inability to return home, and they must have the well-founded fear of persecution back in their home country. However, it's very important to note refugees, they must apply for admission outside of the United States. So those are people who are not here right now, and they're saying, I cannot go home, it is not safe for me, I need to come here. And they have to get that approval to come here. People who are seeking asylum are people who are already in the United States, and they are saying, I cannot return home. And it follows the same grounds as refugees, so they must have a well-founded fear of persecution back home. So that's the people that are already here. And then the refugee numbers set for 2020 were set at 18,000 people. So that's one of the lowest numbers since it started in 1980. And then another important thing to point out is, like I said, these people who are lawful permanent residents who have these visas, they are not citizens, but oftentimes they will be looking to change their visas into permanent citizenship. So how to gain citizenship in the United States? So an individual must declare their allegiance to the United States. They must have a green card, so that means they're a lawful permanent resident of at least 5 years. It's less, it's 3 if you have a spouse in the U.S., but if not, it's 5 years that you have to have that. You must be 18 years old. You must be able to read, write, and speak basic English. You must be of good moral character, so that means you can't have any felony charges against you or anything like that. You must complete all the forms and documentation. There was I was on the immigration website, there was like a whole bunch of forms that they made sure that you had to fill out. And then you have to take the U.S. naturalization test. So from what I understand, it's 128 possible questions. You will be asked a select number of them, and it'll cover U.S. history and government. And then you also must complete a personal interview as well. So as you can see, it's a very timely process, and there's a lot of work to be put into it as well. And then lastly, we looked at illegal immigration. We watched that in the 30 Days TV episode. So illegal immigration is immigrants living in the United States who do not possess the correct forms and documentations to be here legally. So they are not lawful permanent residents. They do not have their green cards. They can come from crossing the border illegally or from visa overstay. So that's when you hear about undocumented immigrants. That's where that term comes from. So majority of undocumented immigrants actually come from visa overstay in the United States. So as of right now, 62% of the undocumented immigrants in our country are actually here from visa overstay, and only 38% come from crossing the border. So that's kind of how a lot of these undocumented immigrants come here. Like I said, those visas, they expire after a set amount of time, and people will often stay here. So that would mean they no longer have the correct documentation. They're no longer here legally. And that's where the bigger percentage of undocumented immigrants come from. I also want to cover DACA because you may have heard about it in the news. It's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so this was a protection put in place for individuals who entered the United States. Before they were 16, they were brought here illegally and undocumented, and they could apply for permanent resident status. This does not mean they were becoming citizens. It just means that they were allowed to get green cards to live here, so they could live here and work here legally. And then if they met the conditions set, then after the period of time of having their green card, they would be allowed to apply for citizenship, but they'd still have to go back through the whole process again. Currently, no new applications for this program are being allowed, but those who had gotten their protection under DACA would continue to be protected. So I just kind of wanted to cover the difference between the legal immigration and undocumented immigration. And so there are many issues and opinions surrounding immigration in our country. So after watching the 30 Days episode and learning more about the facts, I wanted you guys just to continue to think about your opinions and your possible solutions to the issue. You don't have to write about them, but it's just something to think about as you're looking at the news. It's something that you'll hear a lot about in debates and stuff, and something that you may want to look into some more. It's part of being, an active citizen of the United States. A lot of it is looking at what you think the requirements for a citizen should be. So again, if you have any questions, please always reach out. We are super excited to get a new quarter started, and yeah, that's pretty much it for the rest of it. Good job on your midterms, and we'll start seeing you on Wednesdays.